Om Shanti. Wish you all a very warm welcome and welcome to the Good Night Meditation. Today's topic is Master of the Mind. And most of the time we see that the importance is given to the power of the mind. But even more important than that is the one who is the master of the mind, and that is that invisible star that is behind the eyes, a bodiless being of light, a point that is changeless, timeless, and egoless. The being of light doesn't need thoughts to survive, just like it does not need physical world to exist. This changeless being. Changeless means nothing about the soul's truth ever changes. The true self is the eternal truth. So we have to recognize the power of the one behind the thoughts, before the thoughts, before the mind. To recognize the power of the one who's the king of the mind. Thoughts are constantly changing in the mind. One cannot use the mind to know oneself. Today, the mind is under the influence of many false identities, including this identity with, in my case, Rini personality. And the only way the soul can be free of these identities is by detachment from the mind. Until the soul detaches from the mind, it cannot take its mastery back. Just like to become the master of this physical world, one has to first detach from the physical world. To become a master of the mind, the invisible star, the king soul, has to become detached from the mind first. Just like in relationships, only where there is detachment, there is love. The capacity to love unleashes only from the space of detachment. And so the king soul, who's combined with the supreme soul, that is his natural state. There's no effort to be living with God. For the soul, it's natural to only see the Supreme Soul as all his relationships. It's normal for the being of light to experience the land of silence as his home. It's natural and normal for the timeless being to be free from the bondage of the past and the future, because he lives in the now. In this moment, a thought that was there just a moment ago has already become a past. So in the now, there are no thoughts. So the soul is thoughtless, nirsankalp. Thoughts exist only when the mind comes into contact with the physical world, when the soul descends from the supreme abode to this physical world to play its part. Mind gets activated and over time corrupted. But now it's the time for this invisible star to purify the mind with the company of the Father. Mind itself is not a problem. It is the influence it is under, the bad company that the mind is under is the problem. Soul is forever pure, forever changeless, and that has to be the position in which one is stabilized to work with the mind. Only from that space of being that changeless, eternal truth that the self is, the timeless truth that the self is, can get out of the clutches of time-bound reality, which is temporary, transient, and not even real. So more the soul becomes free from the mind, the more it has the power to control the mind. Without becoming free from the mind, it cannot control the mind. And so the more soul lives in the awareness of who am I. So for example, let's say the soul that I am behind this mask called Rini is an interaction with a group of people or in some situation in the story. And the soul is very aware that these are my brother souls and we all come from same home. We all have one parent, and that is why we are all brothers. We are all tiny points of light, wearing our costumes. Because in this physical world, you need a costume to interact, which is our body. And another thought, a stray thought comes from past old habit of judgment for their part or judgment of their script. The soul that is detached from the mind will be able to stay detached from that thought and immediately go straight into its experience of who am I, and not taking interest in the thoughts of the mind. Because if there's even the subtlest interest in the thoughts of the mind, then the mind will pull the soul into believing into those thoughts, into those false identity that those thoughts are painting the picture of. But if the soul is detached, whilst in action, then it can see that stray thought and completely ignore it, not give it any interest or any further interpretation, no judgment, but straight in 1 second come back to who am I? I'm not defined by my mind. I'm the one who can be in the midst of the storm of the mind and be that silent one. And then from that space, silence the mind and make that storm a storm in a teacup. That is the power of the soul. So let us pay special attention to who am I and who do I belong to. Then the mind shall surrender. Surrender to the King Soul, surrender to the Supreme Soul, which we call in our study the state of Man, Mana, Bhava, which means the mind is now offered to God by the one who's first detached from the mind and not defined by the mind. Because this winning identity also exists in the mind. And that spiritual ego can try and keep correcting and checking and changing the thoughts in the mind, fighting a lost battle. So the soul has to step out of the mind 100%. And then the healing of the mind begins. Because in that state, the soul and the Father are never separate. They have the same sanskars, they have the same way of seeing the drama as a story and not a reality. Supreme home feels so natural and normal to this being of light. Being changeless, being thoughtless, being timeless is so natural and normal for this being of light. And seeing others with the same vision is not an effort. It's effortless effort. Effort is there, labor is there. That means the ego identity of some spiritual identity created by the mind is trying to become more spiritual by fighting with some other ego thoughts and ego mind. Most importantly, who am I? That selfless, again, changeless. Very important. Nothing about the soul ever changes. All the changes are happening in the arena of the mind. And when the soul detaches, it can take back its mastery and guide the mind towards the Father, and then Father heals the mind with his pure vibrations and light of knowledge, making it ready for a golden era. But the soul is forever in that space of being like the Father whilst the healing of the mind takes place. That being untouchable, unpolluted being is the true self. See yourself through God's eyes, not through your mind's eye. But show the mind and let the mind see the truth by being with the Father and the Self, who are never separate. I hope it makes sense that how to separate the soul from the mind and then become the master of the mind. Because today a lot of effort is based on making the mind powerful without detaching from it. The key step is detachment from the mind first by the true self, the one who's changeless and timeless. Om Shanti. Thank you for joining for the good night meditation.